Hello, this is Angelia with the podcast Why You Do What You Do. You're either listening or watching this. Excuse me. The podcast that deals with human development and psychology to help you figure out a little bit more about why you maybe do what you do. And we were talking about Urie Brofenbrenner's bioecological theory, and we're going to pick back up on that. Brofenbrenner identifies 5 interlocking contextual systems from the most intimate to the broadest: the microsystem, mesosystem, exosystem, macrosystem, and chronosystem. Although we separate the various levels of influence for purposes of illustration, in reality they continually interact. And usually the diagram is made in a circle where you have like the circle with the immediate parents, and then the bigger circle of the family and the friends and school, and on and on. A microsystem is a pattern of activities, roles, and relationships within a setting, such as the home, school, workplace, or neighborhood, in which a person functions on a first-hand, day-to-day basis. So your immediate environment is what we're concerned with here. It is through the microsystem that more distant influences, such as social institutions and cultural values, reach the developing person. Because like I said, everything you live through, everything you experience affects you in some way. A microsystem involves personal, face-to-face relationships, and bidirectional influences flow back and forth. So, you do develop relationships with other people, they have relationships with you, and information is exchanged both ways, and, people learn, like as a child, you would learn how people want you to do things, and they would learn from you how you like things. How, for example, does a new baby affect the parents' lives? How do their feelings and attitudes affect the baby? How does an employer's treatment of employees affect their productivity? And how does their productivity affect the employer's treatment of them? Of course, a new baby is going to affect the parents' lives. Number one, you're going to have to be able to live with sleep deprivation for probably 3 months or so. And there are going to be changes in your routines and, how you do things. And of course, the feelings and attitudes of the parents definitely affect the baby, because babies can pick up on that. They might not have the knowledge to understand certain words, but of course, any being knows when you're angry or upset. So they can pick up on that, and that will affect their feelings. And of course, if you're not treating your employees well, they're not going to produce for you. That's just a fact there. Anyone who tells you different is blowing smoke, and you know where that goes. So if you're not treating your employees well and expecting them to be productive for you, you're going to be disappointed, because if you're working for a mean boss, you're not going to be as productive. You're not going to feel like you want to be. As soon as the boss walks out the room, you're going to be like, okay, whatever. A mesosystem is the interaction of 2 or more microsystems that contain the developing person. It may include linkages between home and school, such as parent-teacher conferences, or between the family and the peer group. Like I said, I had a lot of cognizant dissonance when I went to school, because I was treated a certain way at home, and then when I went to school, teachers saw my intellect more, the potential for me to be learning more, and then other kids realized I was kind of friendly, and I had to have a good sense of humor to live in the situation I was living in, and my grandma had a good sense of humor, so other kids liked me because I was friendly and I had a good sense of humor and used to make jokes about stuff. So I was living in 2 different worlds, basically, at home and at school. a world where I was not liked so much and a world where I was. So, for me, that was, a little hard. Excuse me. Attention to mesosystems can alert us to differences in the ways the same person acts in different settings. Because at home I was pretty quiet. I just wanted to go out all the time. I would pace and things because I did not enjoy being there. Of course, if you're being told that you are, not a good person, you're dumb, you're hateful to them, you're, just got all these bad things that you don't feel like you do have, and then you're being praised for how smart you are or what a nice person you are. Those are two different things, and you're not going to, be able to reconcile that. So we're looking at, people, the same person's going to act differently in different situations. And of course, you're going to act in a more positive way where you're happy, and in a more negative way where you're unhappy. So that's kind of a preteller about some of the relationships that you're in. Look at your partner. Are they very negative? Because that's going to tell you that they're not happy. And then you're going to have to figure out, why are they not happy? Is it that they're not happy with me, or is it other things in their life that they're not happy with? And then you can have discussions and figure this stuff out. Excuse me, because not talking to each other is the number one cause of people drifting apart and saying they have irreconcilable differences. For example, a child who can satisfactorily complete a school assignment at home may become tongue-tied when asked a question about the assignment in class. And that's because they might be, smart, but they also might be a little shy. They might have a little stage fright about speaking up in front of other people. So, the same child can act differently in different circumstances. An exosystem, like a mesosystem, consists of linkages between two or more settings. But in an exosystem, unlike a mesosystem, at least one of these settings, such as parents' workplaces and parents' social networks, does not contain the developing person, and thus affects him or her only indirectly. Excuse me, because I know my parents used to come home complain about work. So most kids' parents probably do. And they might have friends at work. The kids might hear the parents use the friend's name or have the friend over. We had some friends over to our house and things like that. So, that might indirectly affect the kid. Dad might have a work friend that's this way. And so the kid sees that and say, well, I might be, interested in doing that someday. There's, again, everything you live through influences you in some kind of way. A woman whose employer encourages breastfeeding by providing pumping and milk storage facilities may be more likely to continue nursing her baby. Odd example in my opinion. Yeah. Whatever, just like with child rearing, whatever an employer encourages, the employees will be doing that. The macrosystem consists of overall cultural patterns, like those Margaret Mead studied, if you remember when we talked about her, dominant values, beliefs, customs, and economic and social systems of a culture or subculture, which filter down in a countless ways to individuals' daily lives. Because like I said, everything does. Everything is going to affect your life. The religion you find yourself in, the country, the culture that you're in, the way your parents believe about things, the way your grandparents believe about things, things you experience, are all going to affect you in some kind of way. For example, whether a child grows up in a nuclear or extended family household is strongly influenced by a culture's macrosystem. We can see a more subtle macrosystem influence in the individualistic values stressed in the United States, as contrasted with the predominant value of group harmony in Chinese culture. So again, if you grow up in a neighborhood that's not so positive, you might have a negative outlook. If you grow in a more positive neighborhood, you might have more positive outlook. And they use, the U.S. and China here as examples. U.S. is very individualistic. We have individualistic goals and values. And China is more, interested in the harmony of people. I had a friend who came from China, had a restaurant down the street that I used to go to a lot. I really enjoyed it. And they were not so happy with the American way of life. And that's what he was telling me, that there were like 22 people living in his house, all family members. They were all working and earning money, and all the money went to, he said one pot, and I've heard that phrase before, but I'm assuming, one bank account or whatever, or who knows, I don't know. But then anytime anybody's kids needed anything or anybody needed anything, was all shared. And they were all living together happily in a big house. They had a big house out in the East End, big plantation style, house with like 5 bedrooms. And so everybody had their own deal. And then there was some rooms downstairs they were using as bedrooms. They were basically having like one common room, one dining room, and, the kitchen. And then the rest they were using as bedrooms. So, but they had a good setup. But because he didn't like the competitiveness of the culture, like other, people that he would go to business network meetings and things like that. And he would hear people talk. And I've been to meetings where I have heard people talk, and I'm like, no, that's just wrong. That is bad, in my opinion. And I would definitely never do that to someone to get ahead, because that's wrong. And so I'm guessing it was similar things that set him off, but he said, I'm not happy here. I thought this would be the land of opportunity and we would be happier here. But I've decided to go back to China. I don't like it here, and, I think that's sad because, they would probably have a better life here than they would over there. But, their government probably liked that. It's like, aha, they left America. But, everyone is different. And there are different values and different influences. So you can't go across the board and say, this culture is bad, that culture is bad. No, because you don't live in that culture and you don't know enough about it to make your decision. If my advice is, if you find yourself hating on a culture, learn more about it. Learn more about it and see if you have a foot to stand on, because 9 times out of 10, you're not gonna. Just, I would not have you be ignorant, friends. The chronos system as the dimension of time, the degree of stability or change in a child's world. Because again, the times you live in, as we talked about, the depression, are going to affect your outlook on life. So if you grew up during the depression, you might be, I know people who grew up during the depression, oh my goodness, and they're cheaper, they don't spend money on frivolous things. And I know people who grew up during the boom times of, 50s, 60s and things. And they're a little more willing to indulge themselves. So again, it's all about the time you grew up in as well that affects your world and your outlook on life. This can include changes in family composition, place of residence, or parents' employment, as well as larger events such as wars, economic cycles, and waves of migration. Because all of these things can affect you. If you're having, like, I had a sister who passed away when I was a teenager. So my family went from me and my brother and sister to me and my brother. And my mother had a real hard time. Parents try to not play favorites, but it was obvious that she spent a lot more time and attention with this child. So that affected the whole family. And it made me actually want to get out of it more, because I saw, how devastated that my parents were. And I believe that had it been me, they would not have been that devastated. And I actually heard a family rumor, I don't know if it's true, that it was said, why couldn't it have been me? So, that does affect, things, the way you deal and look at things, and things like that, they change you. Changes in family patterns, such as increase in working mothers in Western individual societies and the decline of the extended family household in developing countries, are chronosystem factors. Because in the after the war, it became increasingly harder as the cost of living went up and the pay scales did not keep up with that. More and more women had to go back to work, and the divorce rates also went up, probably because of the stress of trying to make a living. So then more women had to go to work. So my mother, she had to go back to work when she was divorced from my father. So again, that's going to affect you in some kind of way, whether you're on board with this or you're not on board with this. Extended family households, I hate to even touch in that, because I was abused in an extended family situation, and I wish I had not been left with this person. And when my mother found out exactly what had happened and who had done what they had done, she also apologized and said, had I have known all that was going on over there, I wouldn't have left you over there. But again, extended family households can be a good thing. I know a lot of grandparents who raise their grandchildren. I know grandparents who have their grandchildren living with them. I know there's actually, in the house next door to me, there are 4 generations, living together in this house. It's a nice big house, but, that's a lot of people under one roof. So that's also going to affect your outlook and, the way you're doing things in your world. According to Brofenbrenner, a person is not merely an outcome of development, but a shaper of it. Because, again, you can shape your environment. You make choices, and you shouldn't be just a passive, being and letting the world happen to you. You should be an active being and doing things you want to do, and trying to go for things you want to do, and shape your environment. And like I said, you influence your parents, you influence the people around you, and based on how they're acting towards you, you're going to react towards them. So, we all shape our life to a certain point. People affect their own development through their biological and psychological characteristics, talents and skills, disabilities, and temperament. Because, like I said, you get that DNA from your parents, and there are biological traits in it that can affect you one way or another. Your psychological characteristics, you have a state of mental health. That could be a good one, that could be a bad one, that could be your average one, So that's going to affect how you learn and grow and develop. Your talents, some of us have talents, some of us do not have talents that the other ones have, but we all have some kind of talent, I might be able to write something, whereas if you ask me to measure and make something, in a measurement in an organized way, like I like to paint and things like that, but you can look at my paintings and tell I like more impressionistic abstract things. No one's ever going to confuse my work with Da Vinci's. And skills, things we do well. And like I said, if you kind of turn a child towards the direction where they do well in, they're probably going to succeed, because we like to do things that we do well, and we usually achieve in things that we do well. Disabilities. Some of us have disabilities from day one. It could be a learning disability. Oh my goodness. And, a mental disability, and that's unfortunate because that's going to affect how you learn in school and how you feel about school and higher education. And then you might have a physical disability, which keeps you from doing physical things that other people can do. And your temperament. If you don't have a great temperament, that's going to also affect you, because other people are not always accepting of that. There's nothing worse than when you're out and doing something and somebody throws a fit and throws a big temper, and you're just like, dear gosh, why? What is the deal? Can't you control your temper? So all those things are going to affect you. And we're going to dig a little deeper. We're going to talk about the adaptive value of immaturity. Yeah, that's right. You always thought maybe not such much value in immaturity. And there's not, to a point. But in a way, there is. So, in comparison with other animals, human beings take a long time to grow up. And if you've ever had pets, you know that. You might have a kitten, and by the time it's 6 weeks old, it's not drinking its mama's milk anymore. It's ready to go eat food and stuff like that. Whereas a human baby at 6 weeks old, they're still, like this big, and they're definitely still drinking milk. They're definitely not ready to get up and walk around. We're pretty freaking slow compared to other animals. For example, chimpanzees reach reproductive maturity in about 8 years. Rhesus monkeys in about 4 years. And lemurs in only 2 years or so. Human beings, by contrast, do not mature physically until the early teenage years, and, at least in modern industrialized societies, typically reach cognitive and psychosocial maturity even later. So like I said, the critical thinking skills, they say, don't even come into your about, between 21 and 25. So, in the animal world, we take a long time to grow up. From the point of view of Darwin evolutionary theory, this prolonged period of immaturity is essential to the survival and well-being of the species. Human beings, more than any other animal, live by their intelligence. Remember we talked about that the other day. We don't have the claws and fangs. We didn't even back in the day. We had a little more, probably, pointy teeth, but not so much. So we had to live by our wits. We had to figure out how to overcome. Human communities and cultures are highly complex, and there is much to learn in order to know the ropes. And we never totally do, because our society's gotten so complex, it's impossible to know everything that everyone knows. A long childhood serves an essential preparation for adulthood. Some aspects of immaturity serve immediate adaptive purposes. For example, some primitive reflexes, such as rooting for the nipple, are protective for newborns and disappear when no longer needed. The development of the human brain, despite its rapid prenatal growth, is much less complete at birth than that of the brains of other primates. Excuse me. If the fetus's brain attained full human size before birth, its head would be too big to go through the birth canal. Yikes. Instead, the human brain continues to grow throughout childhood, eventually far surpassing the brains of our simian cousins in the capacities for language and thought. The human brain's slower development gives it greater flexibility or plasticity. You've heard me talk about your brain being plastic. Well, that's what that means. Is not all connections are hardwired at an early age. And you've heard me talk about that too, how your babes are pretty much insane when they're born because, they're not hardwired yet. They're just now learning and making those connections that they're going to need later on to have sanity and not jump off of, balconies and jump out in front of cars to stop them and things like that. This behavioral and cognitive flexibility is perhaps the human species' greatest adaptive advantage. The extended period of immaturity and dependency during infancy and childhood allows children to spend much of their time in play. And as Piaget maintained, it is largely through play that cognitive development occurs. Because imagination does play a part in your development. When you're imagining, you're actually working out problems. You're actually thinking about how you would do a thing. So that play serves a purpose. Play also enables children to develop motor skills and experiment with social roles. It is a vehicle for creative imagination and intellectual curiosity, the hallmarks of the human spirit, or the human mind, however you want to put that. Research on animals suggests that the immaturity of early sensory and motor functioning may protect infants from overstimulation. And if you've been around babies and you overstimulated one, you know what, they're done, because each child has its own level that it's okay with. By limiting the amount of information they have to deal with, it may help them make sense of their world and focus on experiences essential to survival, such as feeding and attachment to the mother. So, these new things you're trying to show it and everything might just be too much. There's like, oh, okay, I've had enough faces and, interaction, enough words, I'm done. They gotta stop, and take a break. Sensory overload. Later, infants' limited memory capacity may simplify the process of linguistic sounds and thus facilitate early language learning. Because, like I said, we don't learn it all at once. There's a way we go about it, step by step, certain ways. And no two children are the same. They all learn it at a different rate, at different ways. But excuse me, there is optimal times that we all learn it. So, limitations on young children's thought also may have adaptive value. For example, Piaget observed, goodness sakes, this little gnat, that young children are egocentric. They tend to see things go away from their own point of view. This tendency toward egocentrism may actually help children learn. And this gnat, I wish I could catch him. I would squish him. I know that's mean, but he is bugging me too much. In one study, 5-year-olds took turns with adults in placing furniture in a dollhouse. In control groups, goodness sakes, I'm so tired of you. Go away. An adult in placing furniture in a dollhouse. In a control group, the adult had already placed half of the items, and the children were then asked to place the other half. When questioned afterward, the children who had taken turns with the adult remembered more about the task and were better able to repeat it. So they do learn from adults. They do like interacting with adults. And it helps their brain to grow. So if you think you're just going to leave your kid there, get away in the name of Jesus. And nothing's going to happen. You're going to be disappointed because nothing is going to happen. Because they're not going to learn anything. You've got to put the love and time and effort input into your kid. It may be that I did it bias helps young children's recall by avoiding the need to distinguish between their own actions and the actions of others. Young children also tend to be unrealistic in assessing their own abilities because, again, if they have a negative or positive outlook, they might think they can't do anything. Or they might think, I can do anything I want. It just depends. Some adults, they're not understanding of the way a child's brain works. And they don't realize that, this is immature thinking and the kid's not being a jerk or whatever. Believing they can do more than they actually can. This important immature self-judgment can encourage children to try new things by reducing their fear of failure. So, see, it's an adaptation to help the child to go out and want to do new things. All in all, evolutionary theory and research suggests that immaturity is not necessarily equivalent to deficiency, and that some attributes of infancy and childhood have persisted because they are appropriate to the tasks of a particular time of life. And notice they said infancy and childhood, because once you get to be an adult, you should not be acting immature. You're supposed to outgrow that and become a mature person. So don't even be saying, oh, well, psychology said no, it didn't. Lev Vygotsky's sociocultural theory. The Russian psychologist Lev Semenovich Vygotsky was a prominent proponent of the contextual perspective, particularly as it applies to children's cognitive development. In contrast with Brofenbrenner, who sees contextual systems as centered around the individual person, Vygotsky's central focus is the social, cultural, and historical complex of which a child is a part. So he thinks, with the child, the environment is more of an effect on the child than the child, participating in the environment. To understand cognitive development, he maintained one must look to the social processes from which a child's thinking is derived, because the people around us, their thinking does affect us. Like I said, what your parents thought, what your grandparents thought, the way family members thought, what their kids at school thought, the way teachers thought, it's all gonna be input that you figure out something to do with, either to use it in some way in your personage or to discard it as useless information. Your brain decides how that is going to be used. So we're going to stop there, and I hope that this has helped you to figure out a little more about why you do what you do. Until next time.